So welcome back, and thank you for the colleagues of such a powerful and inspiring presentations, and for the support of for Lithuanian public broadcaster. It's always good to have somebody standing behind you whose support you can feel. So I will start briefly defining the situation that Lithuanian public broadcaster faced last year, last year, the stage that we are in currently, and then I will pass the floor for our guests and presenters. And I'm also very eager to hear different experiences, starting from Sweden, Hungary, and also Brussels and Germany. It would be very good to have an overview from the first source, so to say. So actually, at the beginning of last year, in January 2019, Lithuanian Parliament, the majority, the rather new majority, formed an ad hoc investigation commission to carry out a scrutiny of LRT's financial and economic activities. In October, they announced the conclusion of its investigation, proposing the changes to LRT management structure, with the aim of making it more similar to state-owned enterprises. However, the conclusions were doubtful as to their quality and substantial, and a number of Lithuanian media experts and international institutions have also expressed their concerns on this matter. On December last year, Lithuanian Parliament rejected the conclusions. However, in spite of that, the ruling majority, in fact, registered a new law, according to which they want to make these changes anyway. The draft law was submitted, and it got the nearly 60 remarks from the Parliament legal department. It was also discussed. It was discussed publicly, and I will define what's new and what's important probably in this draft law. Both the ad hoc commission conclusion and draft law providing for the shortening of the term of office of LRT council members, changing the principle of council formation, establishing the LRT board, and then under this bill, LRT Council's right would be narrowed by giving more power to the board, which should be composed of LRT Director General, 2 deputies, and 4 independent members. They also want to abolish advertising in a website, which we still have as an exception. And also, draft law provides a new position of LRT ombudsman. LRT management has also lately considered establishment of ombudsman position within its organizational structure, but however, although ombudsman as a position sounds nice and progressive, I must say that in that new draft law, this ombudsman would have the very broad and exclusive right to control over the principles and requirements that apply to LRT activities, content and programs. In fact, this person would control how we are fulfilling our remit, not only journalistic activities. Also, legal status is not clear from the nature of the regulation provided, and it is not clear on what grounds he would carry out his activities. Also, what is important is that the terms of supervisory board is reduced from 6 years to 5 years, which also could at the beginning sound logical, but the problem is now that at the moment the terms is set this way that the members of the council that are appointed by political institutions and the terms of the members and terms of these political institutions do not overlap. If you start to shorten the term from 6 to 5 years, it would start to overlap, meaning the bigger political dependence from these institutions. So I guess the problem also was that unwillingness to debate these changes from the politician side, although LRT was trying to initiate several discussions, and also lately we tried to invite the culture committee, who is like supervisory committee in parliament of LRT operations. Our members of our council tried to invite them to come to dialogue, to talk, to visit, and to discuss the new law. Also, the administration of LRT, we visited all the fractions in the parliament except one, the ruling party's fraction that in fact refused to accept us, refused to discuss it. Now, the stage with the draft law is that at the currently government is supposed to give its conclusions regarding this draft law, and then after that it is supposed to go to the parliament, and then we will see what happens. Finishing this brief overview, I would say that, of course, you can always criticize what the previous administrations has done, and probably there were some lack of transparency and effectiveness, but it doesn't actually mean that you need such a profound changes in the management. And this system was working pretty stable for a rather long time, and then trying to change it would also pose some risks that you can end up not with unclear results and more dependent on the political will, more dependent the public broadcast on the political will. So local journalist community as well as international community criticized this ad hoc investigation commission. It was said that such an investigation should be carried on by competitive institutions like audit office and other. Also, there is still a case pending in a constitutional court about whether this commission was legal at all. So soon we will have a decision from constitutional court about it as well. So we will see how it goes. I hope that that new administration will have a chance to prove that that they can work more effectively and more transparently, and just have some time apart from fighting for LRT's independence to work on a company's matters. But now I will address our panelists, and I will introduce a first panelist. This is Cecilia Roos, and Cecilia Roos is Director of Strategy of Educational Broadcasting Company, the Swedish public broadcaster, and so the floor is yours.
Thank you. So, it's great to be here, and I think I might come from the smallest public service media company in Europe, standing next to the largest one in the world, perhaps. But I think it might be helpful to talk a little bit about the Swedish public service media system, because we have still a really strong support for public service, and we are considered as a cornerstone of democracy still. And this is because we have really strong safeguards for independence, and in order to protect us from political interference and inappropriate state interference. And we also have a really sustainable long-term funding, so we can still do trustworthy quality content. And this is really important, and perhaps it might be helpful to hear a little bit more about this model. But I will start to give you a quick overview about the Swedish public service situation. And in Sweden, we have a population of 10 million, and we are 3 public service companies, really. The educational company that I represent, and we have the Swedish radio and the Swedish television. And all the 3 of us have together an annual funding of 8.6 billion Swedish krona. So we are still considered important enough to have a good funding. We have also, this is really important, we have still a broad remit. So the 3 of us, we covers everything from news, current affairs, culture, children's programming, sports, entertainment, and education. And this is still considered important because if we still could be a part of social cohesion, we need to reach a broad audience, and a broad remit allows that. But of course, we have a harsh debate in Sweden as well. So this guy, Henrik, he's one of the persons that post a lot of videos against public service media. And here he says there's 8 billion reasons to question public service. And of course, he refers to our 8 billion funding. This is another example from the Swedish election last year. This is the party leader, Jimmie Åkesson. He's the party leader of the Swedish Democrats, a right-wing conservative populist party. And he was interviewed by a reporter from the Swedish Radio Youth channel during the elections, and he got really annoyed at the reporter's questions. So he just stated in live radio, if I was your boss, I should close down this shitty youth channel. And in Sweden, that's a new tone. That's a new tonality. A politician in Sweden has never talked about the public service media in this way before. But we have also the other side. This is Olle Westberg, a politician from the Liberal Party, and he represents the side that really supports an independent public service media. And he got really worried. Swedish public service, despite all these independent mechanisms that we have, we are wide open for political control. So he suggested that we should be even protected by the constitutional law. So that's what is happening now in Sweden, that we have this ongoing inquiry that might suggest that we should be also protected in the constitution, so no one can close us down just with one decision in the parliament. But yes, when we have this debate from a Swedish perspective, with this strong support still, we really have to ask ourselves, are we relevant? Will people use us? Do we reflect the country in a good way? Who would visit our funeral if someone would close us down? So now we have this self-critique perspective to make content, so we still will have this strong support because we can't take it for granted. So that is, if I could give you all guys one advice, really consider what you are doing and if you are making the right content and meeting the needs for the audience and the audience behaviors. But this is another picture as well in Sweden, because we have this strong support from our audience still. So this is just a quote from one guy that had watched one of our educational videos about study techniques, and he said, "Oh my God, I got an A thanks to this video." But there are also other important statements about Swedish public service media right now. And now I need my glasses. This is the media researcher perspective. This is a statement from a media professor, and he says that surveys in Sweden and internationally show that citizens in countries that have a strong public service media are better informed about politics and society than in countries where most media is commercial. And this is a strong argument to really protect public service media. And then we have this public service inquiry, a broad parliamentary agreement that now will give us the next remit for the next charter period, the next from 2020, and they say that public service is a democratic and collective utility that benefits all citizens. Therefore, should all citizens participate and contribute to the funding of public service media. So this is a situation, and actually the inquiry has a lot of good arguments how to protect public service media. Okay, so why is it still important with strong public service media? You have heard all about the bubbles, the filter bubbles, the algorithms, the disinformation, and the election fraud and everything. But we think that we have still got a chance to pop some of these filter bubbles because we have unbiased, impartial educational content. And in our case, because we are doing educational programming, we are in every classroom in whole Sweden. We meet all the students, all the children with unbiased programming. And so we reach them regardless of socio-economic backgrounds. So we can play an important role to pop these filter bubbles. And actually, 7 out of 10 Swedes say that public service media gives value for money. And that's also important because if we have funding enough to produce quality content, they are willing to pay for public service media. We are still considered to have high value for society, and we top the list of media trust. And this is an important proof that if you really invest in a strong public service media, the people will give you credits for it. So the Swedish public service model safeguards still both value for money and independent. And now I will try to explain the Swedish public service model. If you can imagine like a stone wall, each brick in this wall is weak. But the independence mechanism, the bricks all together build a strong wall of independence. So these are some of the bricks that creates the public service media model. First, in our remit, in our mission, it says really clearly that we should be independent from political and commercial interest. So this is in our remit. We have also a broadcasting remit for 6 years, and there is a proposal to prolong this to 8 years in the future, because within this broadcasting period, the politicians can't change anything. They can't change the scope, they can't change the funding, so that's a guarantee that we can work independently from the state. Of course, we do the annual public service media report where we describe how we have fulfilled our mission, but the evaluation is done afterwards. So we don't have to tell anyone what we are intended to do, so the evaluation is afterwards. That's also an independence guarantor. We are owned by a foundation. So we are not owned by the state. We don't report directly to the Minister of Culture or the Minister of Finance. So I will tell you more about this owner foundation, but that's also key, a key thing to protect independence from the state. And in our mission, it says that we should be unbiased and accurate. And these are the guarantee that this is why people still trust us in Sweden, trust our content. And the funding of the Swedish public service media is outside the state budget, so they can't mix us up with other state expenses. I will tell you a little bit more about that as well. And then we have the safeguards if we will also be protected in the constitutional law. So this is a picture of how we are governed. The 3 public service companies have a supervisory board, but in this board they are not allowed any politicians. So no politician is allowed to sit in the board. It is our owner foundation that appoint the members in the Supervisory Board, but the main purpose of this foundation is to be a buffer between public service media and the state. That is the main purpose for our own foundation. And now we have this proposal that even in the owner foundation there should be no active politicians. So this is an independence mechanism, really. And this white circle is the state budget in Sweden. We are tax funded, and the tax agency, they collect the funding for public service media from the citizens, but it just bounces into the income side, and then it's like bouncing out again. So we have our funding on a special public service media account outside the state budget. And this is also important because then they can't discuss our expenses together with other expenses like healthcare, defense, childcare, and so on. So we never got mixed up with the budget negotiations. That is also really important. So you can also look at our regulation like this. We have a frame regulation. Of course, we have a lot of regulation from the EU side and a lot of regulations from the national side, but inside this frame of regulation, we have a total editorial independence. So the Prime Minister can't call us up and say, you shouldn't publish this piece, news piece, or the Prime Minister can't fire any editorial boss or fire the Director General. So we have a clear editorial independence within this framework. So to conclude, I believe that it's all about trust. From the very beginning, we are dependent on our parents. The parents, they help us to distinguish true from false. And actually, if we can still create trusted content and have and earn the people's trust, this would be also really helpful to still play an important role for democracy. So I believe that trustworthy public service media content is more important than ever, and because we are a guarantor for, we fact check, we control, and that the news are impartial and unbiased, and therefore we can also be better in media literacy to help people to decode disinformation and interpret footages, information. So you or my company, we make a lot of media literacy programming to help people to be skilled in dealing with disinformation. But we have also ourselves work and be even better in transparency. So now we have this project going on where we are discussing how can we open up a little bit and tell the audiences what kind of sources we use, what methods we did, because we think that transparency is key to earn people's trust. And then we can help people to make informed decisions based on facts and knowledge. So this is like a virtual circle, really. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And sure, national broadcaster, public broadcaster should be both independent and transparent, and trust is very important, and we also value this in LRT, and that's why we established inside LRT the Ethical Commission, and the journalists themselves work on the new internal code of ethics, and the commission start to have meetings regularly and discuss the issues, and then we are going to sort out how we are going to present this for public, so that the public also sees that we are transparent, we are working, we really want to be honest and balanced, and this is very important. And now I would like to ask for another speaker, Agnes, who is a media expert at Mertek Media Monitor in Hungary. And when we had problems and when we discussed our investigation commission and the new draft law, and sometimes get the ambassadors asking or some other experts from outside Lithuania asking whether it's going now to be like in Hungary and or in Poland. So, Mrs. Agnes, I would like to ask you to tell how is it now in Hungary, because I also know that it also started from doubts of effectiveness of previous administration of public broadcaster in Hungary. It started all about it. So please tell us how it was.
Thank you very much. And I think I'm a little bit in a strange situation right now, because we had several presentations today about the harmful effects of the social media, and public service broadcasting was a positive example how it can defend the credibility of the media, and how it can help the public debates and public sphere. In Hungary, it is a little bit in the other way around. I don't want to say that Facebook has a positive role, but practically the public service media is even more harmful than Facebook. And actually, my presentation will be about a public broadcaster, which is always mentioned in Hungary as state broadcaster, referring to the fact that in the communist era, it was just simply the propaganda of the party. And it is quite the same now, even if we have a different political system. We do not have communism anymore, but we have something rather similar to the previous system. And actually, the public broadcaster, which is defined as public broadcaster by the law, is also rather similar. You have to know that it is a propaganda tool. Practically, it follows the typical Russian propaganda elements. So we can recognize the very same stories, the very same framing, which is well known from the international propaganda media. The anti-migrant issues, the continuous questioning of the European values, and as a kind of special Hungarian innovation, which was practically started in Hungary, as I know. It is the very strong propaganda against George Soros, who is already well known in other countries, but basically the attacks against Soros was starting in Hungary. And from regulatory point of view, it is even more interesting that there are several problems with the transparency of the Hungarian public service media. And I will show you that the European Commission would have some tools against these transparency problems, because the Hungarian public media do not comply with the stated rules of the European Union. But unfortunately, the European Commission doesn't do anything against it. I'll just show you some examples. They are rather well-known stories in Hungary. The first one was a real fake news story broadcasted by the public media. There was an interview with a woman who was born in Hungary but lived in Sweden. And she gave a long interview to the Hungarian public news channel about the awful situation in Sweden, how dangerous it is to even to go out, so practically the whole Swedish system is challenged by migrants, and even the police is unable to do anything. So it seemed that practically Sweden collapsed. And some Hungarian journalists, online journalists, tried to find some information about this woman. It turned out that only one element was true in her story. She really lived in Sweden before, but she already came back to Hungary. She talked about the critical situation in Stockholm, but she never lived in Stockholm. She lived in Bostad. And actually, it also turned out that there were some criminal cases against her in Sweden. So the dangers of the migrants is rather strange, because she was a migrant, and she was a rather problematic migrant in Sweden. But the interview was about something else. And this interview was broadcasted by the public television. And the other story is that the German far-right party, AfD, is well known in this room, I think. There was a report about Germany in the public TV, and it was about how the ordinary people try to live together with migrants. And of course, the finding of the public television was that it is something really awful, and the Germans have really negative experiences about the migrants. But it turned out, it was found by a journalist, a Hungarian journalist who is living in Germany, that the public TV interviewed local AfD politicians. So they were not ordinary citizens at all. They were far-right politicians. And they are just two examples, but we have everyday experiences about the propaganda in the public media. Just a brand new example. There was the anniversary of the Stockholm terror attack, which happened 2 years ago. And there was a 5-minute long report in the Hungarian public news program about the events happened 2 years ago. So I think it says a lot how they try to focus on a single topic, which is not so easy because practically there are no terror attacks in Europe, but the ordinary viewers who get the information from the public media, they have a feeling that there are a lot of cases because all of the anniversaries are mentioned, and it is also typical that if there is a criminal case somewhere, for example, someone was killed in London, which really happens, it is announced in the public television that something happened, someone was killed. We don't know yet if it was a terror attack or not. So they keep the sense of uncertainty all the time, even nothing special happened. So it is rather extreme what's going on in the Hungarian public television, and of course it is quite the same in the public radio. It is also important to note that the framing and the terms are also very important. For example, the term refugee or asylum seeker are never used in the public media. They are only migrants. So they do not differentiate the situation of the individuals. They do not accept that there are asylum seekers who are in danger in their own country. This problem doesn't exist for the public media. And sometimes it is really funny, but of course it is very sad to see that Western European countries, and especially big Western European cities like Berlin or Brussels or Stockholm are regularly mentioned as dangerous places where practically the local people disappeared. It is impossible to live there. And of course, for those people who are living in an international environment and who have contacts all over Europe and who consume international media, it is just a clear propaganda, but there are a lot of people, especially older people who do not speak any foreign language, who do not use internet, and they really believe this framing. And of course, it is a continuous struggle for the propaganda media, and especially the public media, that they have to create enemies. Because it is not easy to keep the high level of fear if there are no terrorism. But they create enemies all the time, not purely the migrants, but also Brussels, which is typically mentioned as Brussels, not as European Union, because the European Union is too popular in Hungary. But Brussels is something, you know, it is just about bureaucracy and administration and politics and so on. So Brussels became an enemy, and also Soros, of course, and the Hungarian human rights NGOs. There was a figure about the Swedish public media. I also have another figure. It is a little bit more complicated, but I will explain it. The whole story started in 2010, because previously we had independent public service media institutions. We had Hungarian television, we had Hungarian radio, we had Duna television, mainly targeting Hungarians living out of Hungary. And we also had an independent news agency. They were completely different organizations. In 2010, the new media law was voted by the parliament, and it created a new organization, MTVA. It is very important. And it is not the public media itself, it is just a financial fund. And a few years later, in 2015, there was another change in the media law, and practically these previously independent organizations were closed. Previously, they were there, but somehow they were not so important anymore, because the MTVA had the value. But after 5 years, these independent organizations, or these organizations were closed. So practically the most important institutions of the Hungarian media history completely disappeared. They do not exist anymore. And one new organization was created. It is called Duna Media Service Nonprofit Limited. And it is called public service broadcaster by the law. There is a kind of control mechanism behind this Duna. There is a political control, even opposition party delegates are included in this foundation. There is a financial control, there is a civil control. So if you just simply read the Hungarian media law, it seems to be quite okay. It seems to be quite European. We have a public service broadcaster, and we have different kind of control mechanisms. But if you do not read only the media law, but you also check the budget of the institutions, you realize that this Duna is practically just a pseudo organization. It has no budget, but the MTVA, which is not controlled at all by nobody, it has a huge budget. And we have no idea how this 300 million euros is spent. So practically, we have Duna Media Service Non-Profit Limited without a real budget, but with very democratic control mechanism. And we have an MTVA, which is a financial fund without any kind of control. It is a really tricky solution. I think it was a brilliant idea from someone close to the government who found this structure out. But I think it is rather easy to understand how it works. Practically, I'm a little bit surprised that no one realized the essence of this Hungarian system, although there were several delegations, including from the Council of Europe and European Commission and so on, who controlled and checked the Hungarian media system. The basic problem, the basic transparency problem with the MTVA is that it is practically not possible to get any information about the spending. For example, we do not have annual report or something like that. Of course, journalists and civil organizations like or NGO, Mertek Media Monitor, so we try to get some information based, so we send a data request based on the Freedom of Information Act. Usually we do not get any information. So typically they do not get information and we have to go to the court. You know, the problem is that it takes 2 years. It is a long legal procedure, and of course, the NGOs and the journalists cannot really afford these legal costs. And it doesn't matter for the MTVA, they have unlimited sources, so they just pay to their lawyers. And actually, it is less and less typical that journalists send data requests because it is absolutely hopeless to get any relevant information. And It is just an additional information. I don't want to go into details, but the MTVA, or not the MTVA itself, the Hungarian parliament also hacked the public procurement law, because based on the European rules, the audiovisual or radio media service providers can be exemption from the public procurement. But in the Hungarian case, it is not enough, since the MTVA is just a financial fund, so not a media service provider. So the Hungarian Public Procurement Act says that audiovisual or radio media services are exemption from the public procurement, which is really simply hacking of the EU guideline, but no one cares about it. And it is a brand new development that even the opposition politicians are unable to get any information about the MTVA. And maybe you heard about the big demonstrations just before Christmas. We had, even there was -6 degrees, but there were thousands of people in front of the MTVA. You can see some pictures here, and the policemen are there. But it is even worse that theoretically, the member of parliaments can go into these public buildings, and the opposition, some opposition MPs decided to go in, and you can see that there had some problems with the security guards, so practically they were physically attacked by the security guards. It also turned out that, and it is already really extreme, that it was a private security team, and the policemen were not allowed to go in to the MTVA. Even the opposition politicians called police by phone, but the policemen were not allowed to go in. So the situation is already absolutely extreme, and of course it is not easy to find any solution, but we tried to do something already 3 years ago, because we realized that this very strange organization structure is clearly against the EU regulation, and actually the lack of transparency is clearly against the stated rules. So we turned to the competition DG of the European Commission. We have a formal complaint, or NGO, and also a very active and very talented MEP Benedek Jávor, who is an opposition MEP, and a Budapest-based government critical Club Radio. So we submitted our complaint because of the public service media financing 3 years ago. Nothing happened. I mean, the complaint was accepted, so there is a formal investigation. It was accepted as a complaint, but without any result. We had a visit just a week ago in Brussels, the competition DG, and practically we got the answer that they are still working on the case, although I think it is not so extremely difficult, but I have no idea about the background political issues, why it is so difficult for the competition DG. Anyway, so I think we cannot do too much in Hungary because the public service media system is always part of the broader political system. We cannot change the public service media itself. So the problem is rather complex, but it is absolutely poisoning to have public channels with continuous propaganda messages. And unfortunately, I have to say that Facebook is a rather marginal problem compared to this public service media. We have a fake news factory financed by our tax. So it is the Hungarian case. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We can ask questions later, and now I would like to invite Mr. Jürgen Burggraf, who is from ARD, German public broadcaster, also process technology manager, and also a chair of the EBU publicly funded broadcasters group, which considers legal, policy, and strategic issues relevant to publicly funded broadcasters. So probably Mr. Jürgen can comment a little bit on Hungarian issue as well and the other issues. So the floor is yours, please.
Thank you very much. Just one more presentation to go, and then you're free. And there won't be any PowerPoint anymore. I'm just talking. Why to regulate the media? Let's ask a simple question. I think the reason for it is to do with the mass communication potential and the power of opinion forming of media provided for the public and their impact on the overall democratic discourse in our societies. And with that, of course, goes a risk, a potential or a real threat of manipulation of that democratic discourse by the media, in particular if those are in the hands or controlled by, for example, authoritarian or illiberal governments or totalitarian, be it political parties or governments. And we heard already a couple of hints to these aspects coming from this neighborhood of Europe. And concerning the German case, about which I'm going to tell you a bit, of course, that has a historic background. That goes back to the Nazi regime in Germany and their massive abuse of mass communication means at the time, which was majorly radio at that time. Internet wasn't yet invented. And that led, of course, after the war and the formulation of the new German constitution, or the basic law, das Grundgesetz in Germany, also to enshrine the freedom of expression, the freedom of the press, and the freedom of broadcasting in the constitution. And anything that develops concerning media regulation, including regulation of public service broadcasting in Europe, is very much based on that particular provision in the German constitution. It's Article 5. And on that basis, actually, the German legislator, the German media legislator, is obliged to create what we call a positive order in the media markets. A positive order means a framework that helps to sustain media freedom and media pluralism. And in that sense, you can go that far to say that broadcasting in a classical sense, but also in new forms of presentation and distribution, is a constitutional task that has to be undertaken by the media, by the broadcasters in Germany, in order to help to uphold the overall constitutional order in the country based on the rule of law, fundamental rights, principles of democracy, even social market economy, and so forth. And against this background, the Constitutional Court in Germany has developed a whole body of rulings concerning broadcasting and the media, and the decisions of that Constitutional Court, and in particular the justifications of those rulings, have laid down a whole set of principles that guide media regulation in Germany. And when we talk about constitutional safeguards, I think that's an issue you're currently discussing in Sweden and maybe other countries around Europe. Does it against the ongoing potential and real threats for free media in parts of the European Union? Does it need some constitutional backups or safeguards in the respective member states? In its core, the Constitutional Court in Germany interprets the freedom of broadcasting in a defensive, in a resilient form, as the freedom of the broadcasters against undue interference from either the state or any other vested interest. So it's really part of a concept of resistant or resilient democracy that is also enshrined in broadcasting regulation in Germany. And in its essence, this defense is about the universality of the overall program offer, which is to say it's supposed to be broad, diverse, pluralistic, comprehensive. It must be accessible to each and everyone, or each and every member of the society. And it's about the avoidance of concentration of opinion-forming power in the hands of one or just a few actors in the market. Not to be mistaken, that constitutional task which I was talking about in broadcasting not only applies in Germany to public service broadcasters, it also applies to commercial broadcasters. And this is why commercial broadcasters are as well, of course, brought under specific media regulation in Germany as much as in many other European countries. And while the obligations on private broadcasters in that sense can be relaxed, or can be more relaxed than for public service broadcasters, this can only be the case as long as, and this is the reading of the Constitutional Court in Germany, as long as there are well-functioning public service broadcasters in place which fulfill that constitutional task. To rephrase this, the existence and appropriate development of public service broadcasting in Germany is considered to be a prerequisite or a precondition for the existence of private broadcasters on the media market. So that's quite a broad and quite a profound concept. And that's not my interpretation of, let's say, constitutional rulings. It is in one of the rulings of the Constitutional Court going back to the 70s. Now, if that is the overall and very broad concept, then one of the solutions to sustain media freedom, media diversity, independence of the media, and so forth, one of the ideas is to set a public service broadcasting organization, as this is the case in Germany and in many other member states of the European Union and even further in Europe as such. Now, if that is the idea, and they have to function against these societal and constitutional purposes that I mentioned, then some safeguards should be in place to make them work appropriately and properly. And I want to share just a few thoughts on the elements in place in Germany in view of that. The first thing is to say that the definition of public service broadcasting in Germany is technologically neutral, which is to say that broadcasting services cannot only be classical linear services like classical radio and television, but of course all relevant new forms of media services, including online services and so forth. And the second thing with technological neutrality is that all relevant means of transmission to transport public service public services or public service broadcasting services to the audience or to the users must be able to be used by public service broadcasters in order to fulfill their respective task. So there is the right to participate in technological development of public service broadcasting in order to deliver the societal functions or tasks which it is supposed to do. Another important prerequisite for functioning well is, of course, everything that goes around the question of defining the remit and delivering on the public service remit. The public service remit in Germany, as much as in many other European countries, is defined in a very broad sense, in form of qualitative descriptions of relevant programming categories and objectives. It's not about quantifying or concretely defining genre programs or single categories of programs and even their quantity as part of the overall program. It's about qualitatively defining what public service broadcasting is supposed to do, which is, for example, very much along the classical British version to inform, to educate, to entertain. Is a bit broader than that, of course, in the respective regulations of public service broadcasting in Germany. Nevertheless, it's broad, it's qualitative, it's very general. To make these very broad definitions of public service broadcasting more concrete, it is up to the public service broadcasters in Germany themselves to do this. It's not about any government, any political party, any whatever societal group to tell public service broadcasters in Germany what, against the broad definition of public service broadcasting, there are then in the end to do in terms of concrete programming or definition of services. This is up to public service broadcasters themselves in Germany. Nevertheless, and of course, they have to lay this properly down in forms of statutes, guidelines, bylaws, and this kind of stuff. But it is an essential task of the broadcasters themselves to do it. And this, in the essence, is another principle that is in practice in Germany, which is called programming autonomy of public service broadcasters, which is part of securing their overall independence from manipulation or influence from any vested interest. This is not to say that the further making concrete of the public service remit by the broadcasting organizations themselves is without any proper let's say control or supervision, but this supervision or this task of supervising public service broadcasters in fulfilling their tasks in Germany is done by specific broadcasting councils which stand next to the public service broadcasters in Germany, and they consist of representatives of all relevant societal groups in Germany, and they together form these broadcasting councils, which then control the fulfillment of the public service remit by the respective organizations. Part of these broadcasting council are members of the government or the parliaments or the political parties in Germany, but only in a minority position. We had received a very recent constitutional court ruling, which in essence says that there should be a maximum of 1/3 of the members of the respective broadcasting councils coming from let's say the walks of politics, governments, parliaments, and all the other members of these boards have to come from other societal groups, trade unions, churches, women's league, sports federation, you name them. Lots of representative and relevant societal groups. Next to those broadcasting councils, which check the appropriate fulfillment of the public service remit, of course, there are there needs to be supervision over the appropriate use or usage of the financial means which are at our hands to fulfill the public service remit, and this is done by another set of councils next to each of the broadcasting organizations in Germany, which are called the administrative councils. So they do due oversight over the financial matters of the public service broadcasters. Which brings me to a next safeguard that is important and very central to the German system, which is to ensure not only the freedom of the funding system for public service broadcasters from political or any other or state interference, but also to secure the proportionality of funding for public service broadcasters. And proportionate in that sense is not what politicians or parties or governments think is sufficient to fulfill the public service broadcasting remit, but what on the basis of respective applications for financial means is in the end necessary to duly and appropriately finance the overall fulfillment of the remit. And how this is done in Germany to secure a proportionality and appropriateness of funding is a very specific thing. The funding system in Germany is based on the work of a commission which evaluates the financial requirements of public service broadcasting in Germany. To this commission, the public service broadcasters in Germany apply for their financial funds against their own calculations of what it needs to fulfill the public service remit. So it's not politicians telling us what you need to fulfill it, it's us against the concretization of the public service remit and what it needs to finance it, that we go to this commission and apply for appropriate funds. And on the basis of these applications, this commission undertakes a very in-depth analysis of those applications, using various forms of instruments to check efficiency, financial economic calculation, and so forth. But what it is not allowed to do is to judge whether the money for which we apply to provide the services. Oh, sorry, I have to rephrase. What they're not allowed to do is to check whether the services for which we apply for money for are right or wrong as to the public service remit. They can only check whether the funds requested for fulfilling the public service remit are proportionate. That is an enormous safeguard against any political interference with the funding of the fulfillment of the remit in Germany. Once they have come to a result, which is that they fix the license fee or the monthly price or fee to be paid by the citizens in Germany, then they hand over this result and this recommendation to the parliaments, the federal states parliaments in Germany, and they can do two things. The one thing is they approve it, and then it becomes law, and then it's done. Or if they want to deviate from it, they can do this only on very limited grounds. Once again, the parliaments cannot say, with this like program or parts of programs, we consider them not to fulfill the public service remit, and this is why we do not agree with the suggestion of the Commission concerning the funding of public service broadcasting, only in the essence if the amount proposed by the Commission was socially incompatible, which is to say was too high for people to pay it and thus to access our services against evaluations concerning the overall economic situation, development of wages, and so forth. Only in that case they could deviate from the from the suggestion by the Commission. That is quite a high hurdle to jump over, to deviate from the proposal by the Commission. The national media legislator in the past has tried this once, in combining criticism over the license fee to be paid with criticism concerning certain programs, or actually it was about criticizing the amount against demands to make savings and to make structural reforms, including program reforms. And that led to a situation where the funding was supposed to be combined with taking political influence, which made us take it to the Constitutional Court, and we won. These are just a few core elements which are there to sustain independence, accountability, sustainability of public service broadcasting in Germany. I have one or two other aspects, but I'm kind of leaving the national background. I want to come to the European context and just hint to one or two things, and then I'm finished. You certainly know that the European Union doesn't have any competence or genuine competence to regulate the media. Nevertheless, it is a fact that the European Union understands and acknowledges the significance of public service broadcasting for the well-functioning of democracies in the EU. You might have heard, or certainly have heard, about the Amsterdam Protocol, or the protocol about public service broadcasting, which is attached to the Amsterdam Treaty of the European Union, which makes that acknowledgement, and it says that public service broadcasting in the member states is directly linked to the democratic, social, and cultural needs of each society in the European Union, and the need to sustain media pluralism in the EU. So while that doesn't directly lead to regulating the media from an EU level, nevertheless, the acknowledgement of its importance is enshrined in EU primary law, and that is a very important provision when it then in the end comes to the application of competition, and particularly state aid provisions of the treaty to the public service broadcasters in the member states. There's another provision in the EU treaty one should not forget, and that is Article 2 about the values of the European Union, which reads in its first sentence, the Union is founded on the values of respect of human dignity, freedom, democracy, equality, the rule of law, respect for human rights, and other things. And there's a second sentence in that article which reads, these values are common to the member states in a society in which pluralism, and understand Commission also here sees media pluralism, in which pluralism, non-discrimination, and some other values prevail. Now, why am I telling you this? First of all, the Amsterdam Protocol is really underpinning, on the one hand, the importance of public service broadcasting for the European societal model, next to the respective, let's say, situations in the member states' constituencies, and at the same time, of course, it is restricting the application of, let's say, competition law and, let's say, market logic to public service broadcasting, which is very, very important when it comes to the application of state aid provisions of the treaty to public service broadcasting. But Article 2, you should, for example, read, and we already heard about the situation in Hungary, you should read in combination with Article 7 of the EU treaty, which is about severe and constant breaches of the values of the EU by member states, and that has ultimately potentially harmful consequences for the respective member state. And we are currently talking about Article 7 procedures against Hungary and Poland. And understanding of the European Union, when you talk to, for example, the people in the Fundamental Rights General Directorate of the European Commission, is that they say, look, in the sense of Article 2, values of the European Union, when we defend the rule of law in countries like Hungary and Poland, indirectly we sustain and help to secure the freedom of the media and pluralistic media in the member states. So while they don't have a direct ability to regulate, for example, in a situation where media pluralism in one or another member state in the European Union is undermined, nevertheless, by applying the principles of Article 2, for example, in those Article 7 procedures, they indirectly can secure media pluralism. Maybe that's an interesting aspect where the thinking of the European Commission, and not only the European Commission, but a broad majority in the European Council goes. And against the issues we already mentioned here concerning sustaining independence of public service media in Europe. Just a hint to one other provision of the revised Audiovisual Media Services Directive. It carries now an Article 30, and I think that is important in this respect, because this article, or this provision, obliges the member states to designate one or more national regulatory authorities, bodies, or both, which shall execute supervision over the audiovisual markets and the players in the audiovisual markets in their respective jurisdictions. And then the article says, I think it's paragraph 1, these authorities or bodies must be legally distinct from the government and functionally independent of their respective government and of any other public or private body. I think this rings a bell against situations where potentially by installing new supervisory mechanisms or bodies in member states, the independence of broadcasters, not the least public service broadcasters, might be endangered. And the interesting thing is, once again, if you talk to the European Commission, that they say now for the first time ever, they have a competence to act on the basis of that provision, which is to say, if a member state doesn't comply with this provision of setting up a legally, what was it said? A legally distinct and a functionally independent supervisory body, then in the end it infringes EU law, here the Audiovisual Media Services Directive, and the Commission on the basis of that provision can go against the respective member state. Ultimately, of course, in the sense of not only securing the functioning of the internal market in the European Union, but also values like media pluralism, which underlie, for example, the Audiovisual Media Services Directive. So, which is to say, and I'm coming to an end, which is to say the European Union, basically the European Commission, is developing instruments and tools and means to act in the cases of undermining freedom and independence of the media in the member state. Though they might not have genuine competences, they're currently developing a couple of concepts and ideas of handling these difficult situations. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Jürgen. Any questions from the audience? Very quickly, few questions. No? Yes, please. The microphone. Here, the microphone is here.
Just one question, because I do know about Latvia and Lithuania a bit. I do know that in Germany, for public broadcast companies are allowed to get money by advertising and so on, and that's one of the main questions over here in Latvia and in Lithuania, where they are, because they are in competition with private companies. But would be nice to have two words on that, if it's possible.
The major of income of public service broadcasting in Germany is by public funding. It's around about 95%. and there's an additional income by commercial activities. This is majorly advertising and some other commercial activities of about 5%. It's absolutely allowed. It's even wanted in that sense that commercial income reduces the weight of public funding on the citizens.
Any more questions from the audience? I just probably have one question for Agnes. You told about MTVA and 300 million of budget that they have, and that they are apparently very poor. They have apparently very poor quality news. But what about the rest of the program? Because for 300 million, you can already do something. What about maybe they are providing some good entertaining shows or whatever? And what about their ratings? Do people watch them?
Actually, there are altogether 7 television channels, but the overall audience share is about 11–12%, so it is not high at all. It is a lack because it is not so harmful as it could be, but unfortunately there is a certain market segment which can be easily reached by these television channels. And actually the most expensive part of this whole public service broadcaster is the sports channel, because even if we have 7 or 8 commercial sports channel in Hungary, the public broadcaster also launched a public sports channel, and it bought valuable sports rights, just Champions League and Formula 1 and so on. Of course, there is no Hungarian interest because the football is even worse in Hungary than the media. So it cannot be explained why it is public obligation to buy this kind of content. They are relatively popular, and it is just an additional information that in the case of popular sports events, World Cups, Champions League, Formula 1 and so on, there are short 1-minute news before and after these events or during the break. And they are practically propaganda news full with migrant stories. So they can reach even those people who originally do not follow the public media, but they are interested in the sports events. So it is rather difficult to say how many people are reached by these television channels. And sorry, just an additional information that MTVA has a special service. It produces news blocks for the radios every hour. It is sent electronically, and the radios only have to push a button and they have a news program. Of course, it is absolutely cost-saving for the independent radios. So the problem is that the reach of this radio news is much higher than the reach of the public radios, because lot of independent radios use this public news blocks. Actually, I don't know the exact number of the radio stations because we send data requests, but MTV is not willing to give us the data how many independent radios get this news block every hour.
Thank you. And to round up our discussion, I would like to ask each of our panelists just your projection regarding the PSM's future, because what we observe is that they are being pressed, they are being attacked by politicians. As Cecilia mentioned, that never before you could expect from a politician a remark that you should close one or another channel, and now it is happening. So on the other hand, another challenge is about building trust with the audiences and so on. So what is your projection for a future, say in like 10 years or so? What's going to happen with the public service media? Then maybe Cecilia, you start.
This was a hard one. But I think when we are looking at what's happening in Hungary and in Poland and also in other examples in Central Europe, I think we are heading for really difficult times the next 5 years, because we have this neoliberalism and populistic parties that really would like to narrowing down public service media. So there will be cutbacks, and there will be perhaps a narrower remit for many public service companies. But then I hope that it might also be like a flashback or a what do you say in English, that it will be like a turn kickback, because we can see in Sweden that the politicians they are looking fearfully at the Hungary examples, for instance, and so we have this new discussion: why do we really need public service media? So perhaps we will have this for a couple of years, and perhaps there will be a turning point. But this is only my hope.
Yeah, and Jürgen, please.
More guessing than knowing, of course. I'm very ambivalent in view of this. I think quality media, quality journalism, responsible media, in particular public service media, are more important than ever, given overall political, societal, and whatever developments. I think that applies also to a concept of societies becoming more resilient against various threats to democracy, tolerance, and the like. At the same time, I'm afraid that in concrete policy making and regulation, we will face a trend for further restriction and narrowing down space of maneuver in terms of programming, in terms of funding, and so forth. It might come different, but yeah, I remain very, very ambivalent. It's a very ambiguous situation currently, I have the impression.
And Agnes, please.
It is hard to be optimistic. Actually, I think public service media is always part of the broader political, social, and cultural system of the country. So it can work when otherwise the country works. And in the case of less democratic countries or authoritarian countries like Hungary right now, it makes the situation even worse. So I'm a little bit skeptical about the future of the Hungarian public service media. In the case of a political change, I think it is necessary to rethink this whole structure. It is not enough to change something, or so the ethos of the public service media is missing in Hungary, and I have no idea how it can be built up. I don't know how this kind of culture of independence can be created in a country where it doesn't work at all. So it will be a big question, I'm absolutely sure. And there is, among independent people and academics and so on, there is a thinking about the potential future of the Hungarian public service media. We have to find something out, but I have no idea if it is really possible to build the culture of the real independency and culture of the real quality. at least it takes a long time.
Thank you. It's sad to hear, and yeah, well, I hope that the societies of European nations and Hungarian society itself would support independent media anyway, and so this is the only hope, I think, this the public pressure when there is no other hope. And when the European Commission is rather slow in its decisions, which is, I think, it's encouraging the other well, potential dictators probably to go further, yeah, because you go on unpunished. But however, thank you very much. Thank you everyone for participating, for sharing your experience, and see you in the other conferences. Thank you.
Translation, please put it here, okay?